Logan Roy is searching for who his successor will be. If you don't know who Logan Roy is, he is the character on the hit show Succession. And so when you look for someone who's going to succeed the leader, there's so many questions that arise. Obviously, we're not talking about what's going to happen in that television show. I'm here with Kenton my predecessor at Mariners Church. We're going to do this episode on some questions that people who are confronted with when they think about succession. You'll get a sense of how Kenton and Mariners Church thought about succession in terms of how they would look for the next leader and the kind of leader they would look for, and some questions that obviously were answered as they conducted the search. And then I'll probably do some reflections. Ken, maybe you can ask me some questions on how did I start evaluating if I would be a good fit. So we're going to talk about the search and the fit. So let's talk about some upsides and potential downsides of these two choices. I got several of them to talk about. One, internal versus external. So some organizations, they look internal or only internal. Some only look external. Others will look either internal or external. Let's just talk about assuming that there's upsides and downsides of both. So what are the upsides of an internal successor?
Okay, so and even before that, let me say this. I think for smaller churches, you probably don't have that luxury. Okay. I think a luxury of internal is going to be with a larger church. Mm-hmm. And I think, at least for me, so I got to be the pastor of a church of 200 and then grow all the way bigger. Really, until a church gets a pretty sophisticated staff, you just can't have an internal candidate because you're hiring for such specific ministry needs. Yeah. And it's actually unfair to look at somebody internally when you're hiring them so specifically for something that, they can't be the leader, they can't be the teacher, they can't be the visionary. So it's a little idealistic for churches, I think, of a certain size. And I don't want to, I think
you just want to throw that out there that this may be not applying to everybody. This question for some churches, they're going to have to go external.
Yeah.
But there's organizations as well. We have marketplace leaders as well, right. Or there's even other roles within the church, like a new discipleship pastor. Do you go external or internal?
Right. So the first is the strength of external. So for what we did, just as a thing, is we did both internal and external. Yeah. So we had a both and. But I think the advantages, the surprises in our research, because we actually had a team that we created that studied transitions for a year because I had some friends and they were good volunteers and say, how do churches do it? And interestingly, they found that internals had a higher degree of success.
Internal did.
For churches.
And I would think, I
wouldn't have thought that.
Well, I mean, there are some upsides for me for an internal.
Yeah.
The person knows the community, already knows the community. I'm referring to the broader community, not the church community.
Right.
So the person knows how to drive to the high school.
Right.
They already have a driver's license in that area. Right. They've lived through some of the pains and victories of the community as a whole,
Exactly.
And then internally, I mean, with the congregation, there's so much relationships that have already been developed.
And on top of that, if you say, who the church is, they understand the identity of the church, and they've bought into the identity. They know the story of the church, they bought into it. The philosophy of ministry of the church, the DNA, all of those big buckets,
totally.
They've bought in.
They've preached the theology of the church. They've trained on the philosophy of the church.
Right. So
there's a ton of strengths for an internal candidate if you have one.
That's exactly right. And so all of these things that, when you have an external one, you're looking at and saying, how do we know that their story matches our story? How do we know their DNA, mission, vision, values, all of these? So hard to interview to. You go, well, we know because this person lives in us. And if they've been a part of your staff, you've actually hardwired it into them at those things.
Yeah, it's a bigger risk on mission, philosophy, DNA, theology for an external hire.
I was an internal hire.
Yeah, I was not.
Yeah. So
you're hearing me own. It's a bigger risk on those key factors for an external hire.
Right.
So what's the upside though of an external hire?
External is you, as you look at it, we've said you can't, there's non-negotiables. You can't change your doctrine. You cannot change your culture. You cannot change your strategy of mission. You can't change your DNA. Churches that go, we're screwed up and we just have to change everything, and they go hire somebody, they fail 100% of the time. You can't hire change. The guy will come in to change it, but what you were is gone. So you're basically doing a start over or a new church. So when you're looking, the advantages of finding somebody who matches your DNA, your story, your doctrine, your vision, and all those things, and at the same time, they've come from the outside and they've had other experiences in other churches. They've had they've been exposed to different things. They automatically they match you in what's core, but at the same time, they've got a whole horizon that you don't have that they can bring to the church that God can use to bring new ventures.
So that's assuming there's a match on all the important things. And if that match is there, an external successor can bring fresh eyes,
absolutely,
can bring experience from other places, but that experience has to be filtered through all that we've talked about: vision, theology, philosophy, all that.
Because it's kind of a marriage. You can't go into a marriage wanting to change the essence of a person. That never works.
Right.
But once you love that person, there's the beauty of the ad.
Yes, and we'll get to me in a moment. But I want to say now, I did feel it was important that I would love Mariners as she was right when I came, or as she is right when I arrive, as opposed to me only loving a future version of Mariners. Because, and I've seen leaders approach their organization like, I'm going to fix it, or I'm going to change it, I'm going to unearth all the stuff that I want to throw out. And who wants to be treated that way? What ministry or what group of people, what body of believers wants to be viewed that way? That's not a kind and loving way to shepherd people at all.
And I don't know, I haven't done enough study, but I doubt it works.
Right. Well, it's one thing to do that in an organization. It's a whole other thing to do that with the body of Christ.
Yes, I agree with that. But at the same time, there are times when it has to happen. If it's a turnaround.
In an organization, a turnaround, which I've been a part of.
There's churches that need turnarounds.
Yeah.
And when there's been huge moral failure, there's times for a new day.
Yes.
When there's been leadership that, the S-curve thing where you've gone way beyond the S-curve and you've gone into decline and you're way down here, you got to do something new.
You have to come in.
There are points you have to have somebody from the outside.
And that comes in with a turnaround approach to leadership, which was not the context. We're actually going to talk about this in an upcoming session. Was not the context of Mariners. And when a new leader arrives in any setting, whether it's local church or marketplace, the leader is wise to evaluate the context and then adjust his or her leadership to that context.
Right.
All right, so we see some upsides with internal and some upsides with external. What about an internal search team and an external search team? So, we've already given our cards on this one. Mariners actually did both. Mariners had an internal search team, but then also
an internal candidates.
No. I was doing that on the candidates successor being internal, external.
Okay.
Now on an internal search team versus an external search team. So some churches don't even hire like a search firm, right?
Oh.
Like they would only have an internal committee of 7 people who would source all the resumes, right?
Right.
Other churches might not have an internal. They might only hire a search firm that then is reporting to the senior pastor.
Oh.
You see? So some churches would not do what Mariners did. Mariners had both. Mariners had an internal search team and an external search firm. So I'm just trying to think about the broader group of people who listen. And, obviously I'm going to try to lead them to the conclusion of there's wisdom in both. But if you had to choose, what's the upsides of the internal and what's the upsides of the external?
Yeah, if I was going to make a mistake, I would go to the internal.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to do that, but
if you had to choose one, you'd go internal.
Because then the focus would be at least I would know We know our identity. We know our story. We know who we are. We know our doctrine. We know everything we know, and we know what we need. And so we've done that work. And so we're going to take our body of relationships. We're going to ask everybody in the church, everybody that you know, and we're going to interview to that. I would trust people in the church to understand that. I think an outside organization, and I love the one that we use, but they are pretty good at understanding what a church needs. But a church not understanding what it needs is such a huge weakness. Then when it gets what it needs to love it. See, I think for you, I would hope, and you would be able to answer it, that you felt loved the day you showed up. And every time you did something, you felt loved and affirmed because you were the right choice.
100%. So I remember I came to interview with the search team, the internal search team. So the search firm, the external search firm, I had multiple interviews with, right. And then a slate of candidates was given from the external to the internal.
To Mariners.
So the internal Mariners team now has, it's called a slate. That's a common term in the industry. Okay. A list of 5 to 7 candidates with, right. Packages on each one, I being one of those. So then, excuse me, I'm being interviewed by the internal group, and I come out to Southern California for the first time to meet, not my first time here, but first time to meet with them. And I call my wife and say, baby, I think if they invite me out again, you'll come and you will love these people.
Yeah.
These people are amazing. I love these people. It was amazing. I feel like my faith was encouraged. I felt so loved on.
Yeah.
They were so hospitable. They were clear about the direction of the church. They have such a love for their church.
And the commonality. You love them.
I love them.
Because who you are, they loved. They met other people and they treated them with hospitality and they loved them, but they didn't love them as a future pastor because even in talking to them, they're like, no, you're different there. You're different there. And difference is okay,
right.
But they wouldn't have been so attracted to them as they would have been to you because it's like, no, this is who we are and you're who we are. This is who you are and that we're that too.
Yeah.
So you have that. That's what
the chemistry. You could feel the chemistry early.
That's right.
Even if it wasn't gonna work and they would have gone a different direction or I would have chosen to stay where I was, I still sensed these are people who I am so glad are in the kingdom and we're in the kingdom together.
And the Mariners would always be the kind of church you would want to be the pastor of. And that's it. And there's other churches that are, that you'd go, I don't think I'd want to, I could be the pastor.
I'd root for them. I'd root for them, but it's not a church I would.
That's right. So that's the value of that strong internal.
Yeah.
You get it.
And the upside on external, I think is, the external search groups typically just have a large network, right?
Well, the value of them, exactly. There is no way we would have ever, in our networks of relationships, would have ever run into you. We never would have. So there are people we could have gotten or candidates that we would have found, but you, and there's probably 2 or 3 other candidates. Let me see. I know who they were.
Don't say their names.
No, I won't.
Don't say their names.
But two or three of them that we never would have come across. I think we got a slate of 8 or 9. 4 of them, 5 of them we would have found, but you're just limiting.
Yeah.
We never would have run into a number, certain people. We just never would.
Good.
And as I talk to churches, that's one of the things that when you're talking about this position, it's so important. I think it's true for most positions on churches today, but to be exposed to the best possible candidates is worth the money.
That's great.
And a church has no competency in this, nor should it. That's not what you're doing.
It's not our expertise.
No. So having somebody out there that's doing that, it's well worth the money.
Great.
It's well worth the money.
So an internal candidate has so much relational cred, understanding of the community. An external candidate, assuming there is DNA match, can bring some fresh perspective. An internal search team is going to, in the same way as an internal candidate, is going to know the church, be able to represent the church really well. An external search firm has a large network. All right, here's another question as the search begins. You've been talking about matching the story of the community, the story of the church with the story of the leader. as you're also weighing looking for a leader who is a value mission match, are you looking for a leader who's reflective of the past or reflective of where the future's going in the community, in church as a whole? It's that famous leadership quote from Gretzky, you skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. How do you balance that? Because it's, in some ways, someone say, well, no one knows exactly what the future is. I mean, you have a sense of where a community is going. Are you evaluating fully on the past, or are you thinking, how much about the future are you thinking? Is the search group thinking?
I love the question. I think, so what we've said is there's all sorts of things that you have to understand about the past to understand story, identity, DNA. But that's just to understand who you are. But the future of the church is what you're hiring to. And the value in that is, that's where I think for me, it was easy for my story was never going to be the future story of the church. I started with 200 people. My story is my story, and there's all sorts of things that the church needed that I was great for. But the story that you're going to write, I couldn't write. I'm not called to write, and it is the future of what Mariners is and its story, and the future of this community and what it is. And some of it's just my age, some of it is who I am, some of it is your age, and some of it is who you are. And so absolutely, you have to have a sense of who you're going to be. So one of the things that in training elders that is critical is the elders have to love the people of the church. And the line is always the people who are here and who are not yet here. And so elders are selected in their ability to love the people that are here today and not yet here. So today, we have thousands of people, but in 10 years, we have hundreds of thousands of people. The elders have to look and love hundreds of thousands as much as they love the people they're just looking at today. And you have to love that. And that's, if you're looking at who will be and who will be affected by Mariners and then you make the right choices. But if you just look and say, you just talk to the people who show up and you give them their church that they want, they become myopic, small, they lose the sense of what God wants to do in the community. They become selfish, self-absorbed, self-serving, and they're never the church. And so it's leadership demands.
Always going towards the future.
That's right. Yeah. Demands it.
So let's talk about
us.
Let's talk about us. When we met, which you had taken yourself pretty much out of the process, which is not the norm, I think, in many churches. And I will say that there are churches where the senior pastor might be highly involved, and you still can have a very, very healthy, successful transition. But you chose to, and I think it's because I've heard you say, you knew that you would have the temptation to. It's hard for you to be in a meeting and not lead the meeting.
Right.
And so that was mainly kind of self-protecting your heart. Right.
And what I needed to do is to train and to be confident in them and not be a part of it. I'm not a good chooser, surprisingly. I'm really not. I've never been a good hirer. I look at somebody and I'm like, you can do that, great. And I'm not. I just don't have good discernment when it comes to that. There's other people who are great at that.
Okay. So at the end of the process, the team's going to offer me the role, or actually technically they're going to recommend me to the elders who will offer me the role. And it was just, the thinking was initially that I would only meet with you and Kay, my wife, and Lori we would all meet together. I think we just had one lunch and it was a great lunch, but I wanted to spend more time with you. Right. So I flew back and we walked and walked. My gosh, man, That's right. We just walked. I mean, really for 2 days. We walked one day a whole bunch, had dinner, and then did it again the next day. And we talked about so many things that I don't think was even set up by, it wasn't set up by the team. This was more on me at this point. Right. So now at the very end of the process, I took a bit of leadership and said, I would like to spend more time with Kenton. My thinking was, I do not want to lead mariners through a strong turn any different direction in vision or in doctrine or in philosophy. And so the more that Kenton and I are aligned, the more of a sync and a match it will be. So I wanted to talk about everything from our view of the scripture to our view of how salvation happens to how do we ask people to receive Christ in a worship service to do you pass out a voter's guide or not pass out a voter's guide, to women in ministry, to how many times does a senior pastor teach? I mean, all from weighty theological stuff on the nature of the gospel all the way to really practical stuff on how do you handle an election cycle, right?
Right.
I mean, we talked we hit all of those things.
We did.
And I'm curious, what was your perception of that time? And I'm eager to share mine. It was only every hour I was only more encouraged, and I'll share why. But what was your perception?
So first of all, in our structure, what we'd had is, and you remember, there are two things that had to happen. The committee had to recommend you.
Yep.
Then you go to the board, but you had to come through Kenton and Lori. So remember, we've talked.
Yes.
We didn't do it, but Lori's blessing was critical. We can talk about that later, but
no, I think this is a good time to say it now because a lot of research was done. This is really crazy. You may not have thought this, but there was a team here that went and interviewed churches that had a successful transition, and they found the most important person to endorse the transition was
the senior pastor's wife.
Wife.
The longer somebody stays, the longer someone's been in a position, the more power moves towards the senior pastor and his wife. And so the wife, she literally becomes, I hate this term, but like a queen. And what they determined is it is the queen's blessing that is the most important. And so literally the 500 people that were stakeholders, Lori, when it came time to introduce you and Kay, Lori was in every room, and also when we introduced you to the church, because the feeling was Kenton is going to say that because he's been a part of the selection, but Lori's the one who's going to really tell us the truth.
That's big.
And so Lori had to be the one. So while we met with you, the issue was both Kenton and Lori are going to have to give their blessing. So we met with you.
Yeah. So us four met together. Kay still. This week we had a dinner after our Saturday night service with some couples in our office. Randy and Susan Bramwell.
Yeah.
They were in there, and they were talking about how proud they are of the transition and how it's been so great. And Kay told them the very first time that we met with Kenton and Lori, it was such an amazing lunch. We met at your house. Eric got in the car and said, "This whole process will be worth it, even if this doesn't happen, just for how meaningful that lunch was."
Oh, that's great.
Because I felt like I learned so much from you. I felt it was so good for my soul and for Kay. We saw a healthy marriage that we respected. We saw a couple who loved Jesus and raised a family to love Jesus and walked together faithfully and in faith for such a long period of time. Your marriage was so beautiful for us to behold that we walked away from that meeting just really thankful for the process.
No, that's great. That's kind of you to say. And then what we did is we said, so part of it is we met with you, had a great response, but the reason nothing else was planned was it's like, well, let's see what they do.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
You were waiting to see like what we would like if we would have further questions or what?
Well, sure. I knew you had further questions. And so I knew from the search team, you matched perfectly. But having spent time with you, you are thorough. I mean, you are a thoughtful person. You are deliberate. And so I didn't have to take the lead. I could simply go, okay, what is it that you need? And sit back because my assumption was if you want this, you're going to come after it.
Yeah.
And the road is going to be through Lori and I if you want it. So exactly what you felt. I've got to spend more time, so we have to do it. And so it's like, and I was wide open. It's like, absolutely, let's spend the time. And then you can tell me how you felt. But part of it was, okay, let's see how you direct it. Because I had written everything I wanted. Yeah. And so I knew that. And I knew that you had already passed those tests. So in your questions, all it was going to do is to say, how well did the committee do and how much do you really meet those things? So every question was a delight because it was like, okay, you're in, you want to do this. So it was a process of saying, for me, oh, he wants this because I knew you fit, but wanting it is another thing.
Yeah. So I remember enjoying those conversations.
Help you want it? Yeah.
No, it totally. The more we talked, the more I felt like God built me for this role.
Yeah.
And I also felt relieved that I wasn't going to go and try to change Mariners into something that she wasn't, because who Mariners is exactly the kind of church that I want to be a part of.
Right.
Which was so important to me. I did not want to come and try to change the DNA of a church.
Right.
I wanted to come and shepherd a group of people towards the future, but from the DNA that she already was.
Right. And so it was at that point more important for me to watch you dig into it, to say, is it really true? Do you really believe that? Is this really true? I believe this, you'd say. Do you really believe this? Does you really, really believe it? Show me how you believe that. And the value of that was you being convinced we were that, and then I got to be convinced you are that.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was sanctifying for me, and
that was great.
As you know, then it was we had a painful juncture in it. So, but then the guy was gracious in that. So I'll end by telling the story. I mean, I was so attracted to Mariners and so attracted to Kenton and Lori and the relationship that we could have. I just was in awe of all that God did here. I said yes to come and meet with the elders for the final process. And then like 4 days later, I backed out. I said no. This was in the end of June of 2018. And the reason I said no is I was all of a sudden filled with this sadness of leaving the team I had built. Mm-hmm. I love the team I had built in my former role at Lifeway. I was speaking at a youth camp that whole week, so I was up close and personal to the ministry of Lifeway. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was seeing kids meet Jesus, and my kids were at this camp, and they were loving it, and so I was being also confronted with the things that we were about to leave behind. We had just finished a swim pool in Nashville where we lived, and my kids were loving that, and I just was like, oh my gosh, I'm walking away. I can't walk away, and I just had this unrest, which was, looking back, was unrest about a typical move, but I was trying to solve the pain of unrest. So I called, backed out, said I'm not coming, and then I took my wife away on vacation. It was for her 40th birthday, and the last 2 nights of that trip, I could not sleep at all. And it was so clear that I was being disobedient to God, that He had marked me, set me apart to be the next pastor at Mariners Church. And it wasn't tossing and turning at night. It was, I cannot sleep at all. And so I called the head of the search firm on a Sunday morning in July. Yeah. You were preaching that
trust me,
that Sunday. And I called and said, hey man, do you think Mariners would want to talk to me again? Actually, I texted, do you think Mariners would want to talk? And he said, they will not want to play this game. They don't want to, they won't want to do this again. And I said, man, I don't want to do this again either. Right. I am ready to say yes. And whenever you woke up, because it was super early, I hadn't slept all night. Oh yeah, because
you're an hour ahead. Trust me, I got texted, and then I'm headed ready to go speak at Mariners. I get a text from them going, hey, are you still open?
He's back in. He's back on the board. Yeah. So you called me and said, book your tickets. I'm glad you finally heard from Jesus. Yeah. And we were out with our kids 2 days later. Yeah. And we spent more time together that week, but that's how it happened. Yeah. And the Lord was super clear and gracious. We'll talk about the announcement next session, but any final suggestions you would say? You've talked a lot about how the church can look for the good fit. Any final suggestions, Kenton, on how the potential successor can evaluate if it's a good fit?
That's your side.
Yeah. I've shared what I did. I've shared,
Yeah.
I wanted to know as close as you and I could be.
Right.
One of the things, my whole philosophy of ministry in terms of programming is in a book called Simple Church.
Right.
And that was a book you used to help staff members.
That's right.
So there was that. John Stott was your mentor. Right. John Stott is my favorite theologian, Cross of Christ, Between Two Worlds, Christian Mission in the 21st century. And so there was so much compatibility theologically, philosophically.
Right.
This is even funny. On the Insights, which is a personality test that the team here uses at Mariners.
Oh, yeah?
And my team at Lifeway used it as well. Your color scheme and mine, our executive pastor showed me one day, you could not get any closer than you as a leader and me as a leader in terms of our approach. Right.
So the best thing you did is so I said this before, being self-aware, I think, is like the journey on the Christian life, because when you're self-aware, then the Holy Spirit can use self-discipline then to create what it is. Self-awareness, you can exegete yourself, and then you can actually teach Scripture well, because now you're taking Scripture and it's through your life. So you being aware, understanding yourself, knowing yourself, and knowing what you valued when it comes to ministry was huge, because I think we were clear, but you were always very clear in who you were, what you believed in, what you were about, in the most important things. And so even like when you said no, it was like so shocking to me. I go, I can't believe he said no. That makes no sense for who he's at. I go, I don't think he's going to stay with us.
That's how my wife was like.
I go, there's no way.
She said, Eric, I knew you, I knew, the kids knew, we knew we were still going to Southern California.
So it was, and it happened so fast, it didn't bother me, but it was like, there's just no way. And so when you called, it's like, oh, God, this is easy. Come on, we're done. You were done. But your clarity on who you are and is the most important.
That's huge.
Because then the match is easy. What you wanted, the things you wanted to do, the stuff that, that's just an extension of who you are. But knowing who you are was the most valuable work that you had done.
So clarity on who the leader is, clarity on who the church is.
Right.
That's a gift, because then you can see if the two match.
That's right.
So when you have a leader who knows who he or she is, and you have the church who knows who she is, then you are set up for a potential great match if the DNA, the philosophy, the theology all syncs together. Hope that's been helpful. Looking forward to continuing this season. Next week, we're going to talk about the announcement. When does how does the church hear about the successor entering the picture? Kenton did it in a crazy way. I thought there's no way this is going to work when he first introduced me to the staff. We'll hear the story next week. It was genius.